Welcome to Well with Jesus, where we do wellness Jesus way. This podcast is all about empowering you to build a wellness routine that honors God and makes you feel your best. Each week, I'll share practical tips and biblical principles to help you create a sustainable routine without the overwhelm, guilt, and spiritual confusion of many wellness trends. If that resonates with you, dear friend, I'd love for you to join me weekly. Don't forget to rate and review the show so more women can find us. Hello, dear friend, and welcome to episode 2 of the Well with Jesus podcast, season 2. So I am really excited to be working on season 2. I didn't actually do a reflection in episode 1 of season 1, but I really loved putting that season together for you guys. Doing that just felt so right for me. It felt so aligned with my goals for myself and my vision for my life and just the value that I can add in people's lives. I'm very passionate, obviously, as you would have deduced, about wellness and in particular women's wellness, but also very much so about helping people get to know Christ and helping them to, just have a better walk with Him. And doing this podcast, season 1, just was those things coming together and felt like such a blessing for me. And yeah, I'm very much still in the beginning stages of this work, but I'm not discouraged by that. I'm super excited to be doing this, and just to be here doing season 2 is a major milestone and an achievement that I just felt was worthy of reflecting on and celebrating. So I hope that you are joining me in that celebration, and I really do look forward to what is to come, and I hope that you will be along with me on that journey as we, learn how we can improve our health and our walk with the Lord. So, on that note, I recently launched a weekly newsletter along with the launch of the season 2 of the podcast. So in that newsletter, I will be sharing updates, so notifications about new episodes when they come out, and also just sharing key takeaways from the episode and personal reflections as well on some of the content that we speak about in the episode. And really just my wish and my vision for this newsletter is really just to have a home base for, the community as it grows. I don't just want Well with Jesus just to be about me sharing content and all these things that I talk about, but I really just want us to also have a community that we can grow with and people to, support us on our journey. And I'm hoping that the newsletter can be a place, a space to start cultivating that, right? And then who knows where it can go from there. But yeah, I just wanted to encourage you, sign up for the newsletter if you have not done so already. The link will be in the description of the episode. So today, we are talking about social media. We are talking about comparison on social media and why we all probably need better social media boundaries. So getting right into it, over the years, my relationship with social media has evolved and shifted majorly, right? I've thought critically about social media, how it aligns with my values, my goals for my well-being, and my desired quality of life. And while social media can be a lot of fun, can be really entertaining, and just a great way to stay in touch with people, I've also found that being unintentional with how I use it has had negative effects on my life, my daily life. And I find that because of how interwoven social media has become in our daily lives, being on social media has become as easy and thoughtless for most of us as breathing. It's something that we do just without really thinking enough about how we do it. And it's funny that I'm saying that because even with breathing, there is actually a proper breathing technique, but it's just something that we take for granted and we just do it. And maybe we don't do it as efficiently because we don't think of how we're doing it. And in the same way, social media has just become an unquestionable part of our life, right? And so I feel as though a lot of us haven't really, or maybe just don't take the time to really just think about like, how do I want to use this? And how do I want to really make it work for me? So over the years, gradually, I have reflected on the role of social media in my life. And I've asked myself some of the following questions. How willing am I to allow content that I see online to affect how I feel about myself and my life? How willing am I to allow social media algorithms and constant notifications and social feedback like likes to rewire how my brain works? So, for example, my attention span, the dopamine response from that social validation, etc. And what structures can I put around my social media usage to make it feel better for me? And reflecting on these prompts has really allowed me to find a healthier and more enjoyable way of being on social media for me. And a huge part of this has been putting in place some much needed boundaries around my social media usage. So this is what we are going to be talking about in this episode. I'll be sharing some of these boundaries and just like, things that can be applied or transferred, I guess, to your own life, and also how implementing these things can help us have better mental health, right? So whether you find yourself in a tricky place with your relationship with social media, or maybe you might just be in a good place, but think, okay, let me do an audit and see, is there anything that I can change to make this better for me? So the first thing that we're going to touch on is self-comparison on social media. One of the reasons that I think, or one of the main reasons really that I think that we need social media boundaries is because we all generally have a tendency, right, to different extents, right? It varies per person, but to compare ourselves to other people. And I think that this is made even worse on social media because of how much content about other people's lives we're exposed to on a daily basis. From how their body looks, to their that girl morning routine, to their what I eat in a day, to their marriage, or where they went on vacation, their wardrobe, their job, this, that, and that. The list doesn't end. So there is just so much for us to consume, so many opportunities for us to compare ourselves to other people. And so I thought, let me rope in some of that psychology. So if you do not know, I have a master's in psychology. And one of the things that we learned in my program that has stuck with me is social comparison theory. So basically, social comparison theory describes how people view themselves in relation to others. And it talks about 3 types of social comparison. So there is downward comparison, where you are comparing yourselves to people who you perceive to be below you in the aspect that you're comparing. And then there is lateral comparison, where you're comparing yourself to someone who you perceive to be on the same level as you in that aspect. And then there's upward comparison, where you compare yourself to people who you perceive to be above you or doing better than you in that aspect. So let's say you are comparing morning routines. So whether or not the comparison is downward, lateral, or upward depends on how you perceive the other person's morning routine. So if you think that that person's routine is better than yours, that's upward comparison. If you're like, oh, okay, well, mine is pretty much the same as theirs, that's lateral comparison. And if you think that yours is better, then that's downward comparison. And basically, the theory suggests that upward comparison generally tends to make people feel worse about themselves, right? Because you're comparing yourself to someone who you think is doing better than you. Whereas downward comparison tends to make you feel better than yourself, better about yourself, because you're like, oh, actually, I'm actually doing well relative to how other people are doing. So anyway, I think that this is useful context for us to keep with us as we are on social media, because it's something that we do without really realizing it, or without being conscious of it, which is just, without realizing it. So hopefully that's a little bit of like some psych that you can keep with you and apply as you use social media. And for me personally, I found that I was engaging in upward social comparison pretty much every time I opened up my social media apps. And for me, it was pretty much just Instagram because there was no TikTok. I was also on X at the time, but with it being text-based, there wasn't really any material for me to like compare. Whereas with visual media, which is predominantly what we have on Instagram, it is so easy to like compare because you're seeing things, right? In the way that when you're walking outside, you see things, you can see another person, that girl has a nice body. Oh, that person drives a nice car, and then compare yourself. So when I was using Instagram in my earlier years, I guess, when I was in like the first half of uni, a large part of why I was using it was for inspiration on my weight loss journey, because I was on a weight loss journey at the time. And I was exposing myself to content that would naturally lead to upward comparison. So I was spending so much time on Instagram looking at other people's weight loss journeys and specifically following accounts of people as well who had the kind of body that I wanted, right? So I followed the trainer who made the program that I was doing and all of that. And this trainer posted before and afters of people's bodies. And that's pretty much what made up their whole page. And I would spend a lot of time looking at that. And so obviously that is grounds, or it's a perfect breeding ground really for upward social comparison. And this only really made me fixate more on the things that I didn't like about my body, obviously because I was comparing myself to people who I felt had better bodies than me. And it made me place all of my hope for happiness in a future where I had the kind of body that I was repeatedly seeing on Instagram. And ultimately, all it did for me was exacerbate the negative body image that I was experiencing, and it just completely wrecked my self-esteem. So, yeah, that is how social comparison has played out for me. And I know that it can happen for a lot of us as well. Like I said, sometimes this is just without realizing it. And so I wanted just to speak about that, just to help us maybe self-check, and check if maybe you relate to anything that I'm sharing. Because if you do, you probably are also going through a similar pattern of upward social comparison on your social media. And that's something that you should probably do something about. So another reason that I think we need to put in place social media boundaries for is our collective tendency to spend ages scrolling online and how that can negatively impact our mental health. So as another example, at the peak of my depression in 2017, I suddenly became aware that I had this unconscious habit of opening X/Twitter immediately after waking up, only to spend ages on the app. And yes, I was having a great time, right? I was having a great time at all the laughs on Black Twitter. But I also realized that there was a lot of heavy stuff that was being talked about there. A lot of what seemed to me as negativity and pessimism that was really only making me feel heavier. And unfortunately, there was no way to get the laughs without the heavy stuff as well. And the Bible does tell us that as a man thinks, so he is, right? Proverbs 23:7. What we consume fills our mind, it shapes our thought patterns, and it affects how we feel. And so I realized that I needed to break my dependency on Twitter to support recovering from depression. And it's ironic because in a way I was using it as a coping mechanism looking back, but it actually was worsening my mental health. So yeah, that's another thing. Just like our relationship with mindlessly scrolling online, there's a term that I recently came across called doom scrolling. When I looked it up, I realized that it's actually not a new term, but yeah, I don't spend a lot of time really on social. So I'm sometimes a bit behind with things, but I heard about this term and I looked it up, and a lot of the articles that were coming up were speaking about how, doom scrolling refers to essentially like just the exposure that we get to negative news, because there is a negative bias on social media whereby we are a lot of the times just exposed to like negative news, right? Because a lot of what the news reports is just a lot of unfortunately bad news, and that we can get stuck in a loop of like opening the news on our apps or on the social and just getting overwhelmed and anxious. And then because of that anxiety, just finding yourself like scrolling more because you do not want to miss out on, the bad things that could potentially be happening in the world. You want to stay in the loop, but that staying in the loop, because of the anxiety and the worry that creates and the despair, it just is not so good for our mental health. So another reason that I think that we just need to critically evaluate our relationships with social media is that sometimes it can cause us not to be so intentional with how we use our time and our attention. So for me, I don't really spend more than a few minutes at a time looking at my phone, because I feel like when I do that, I am becoming disengaged with my actual in-person life. And while I know that for some people, social media is a continuation of their in-person life, for me, it's completely binary, and it's not even, there's no like grayscale. It's the one and it's the other. So I feel that when I am hanging out online, that I'm not hanging out in my real life. And when I'm hanging out in my real life, I'm then obviously not hanging out on social. So when I spend time on my phone, whether it be WhatsApp, whether it be Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is, as much as I can enjoy that time, I never want to spend too much time there, because then I feel like I'm not actually in my real life, if that makes sense. So in 2022/2023, somewhere there, I took a really long break from Instagram. And at the time, I was not on TikTok yet. So for me, that was like my social media. So basically, I took a complete social media break. And in that year, I felt so much peace and just presence in my daily life. And it helped to reset the tone for me for how I want to feel every day. And on top of this, the just constant notifications from our social media apps distract us from our daily activities, right? So from working, from having a meaningful conversation with somebody, right? And I was recently listening to an episode of the Wellness Scoop podcast, which I have mentioned this podcast before, and they interviewed an expert about the relationship between social media use and dopamine. I don't actually think that was exactly what the interview was about, but it was mentioned in the interview. Just the broader theme of the interview was social media. And essentially, in this part where they were speaking about dopamine, they were just speaking about how, or rather, they weren't necessarily speaking about, but the episode reminded me about how each time we get a social media notification, our brains release a dose of dopamine, right? That makes us feel good. And over this time, it trains our brain to crave or look for those notifications so that we can get that feel-good response from dopamine. And if you don't know what dopamine is, it is a neurotransmitter in the brain's reward system, right? So it makes you feel good, to motivate you to continue doing certain feel-good behaviors. So that is like a super basic explanation of what dopamine is. And so, in essence, my point is that if we're not careful, we will allow the default settings on our phones and social media apps to reprogram our brain's attention and reward systems. And I think that this is something that is seriously important to pay attention to. I think that it is very important for us to just preserve the ways that, like the good things about how we're made, the fact that we can pay attention for extended periods of time, the fact that we don't, like just basically not relying on external stimuli like the ones that we get from our social media apps to get that dopamine, but rather doing things in our lives that actually not only make us feel good, but are actually better in our lives for the long term, like getting that dopamine hit from, spending your time on doing something that exerts your energy mentally, that challenges you, but that also gives you that reward from, just the feeling of having accomplished a meaningful task that had a bit of a challenge in it, or spending time, cultivating a relationship with someone in your real life. So anyway, this is just my 2 cents and what I think about why we need to think about these things, because when they created these apps, they thought, they consulted with neurologists, they consulted with psychologists and stuff, experts, people who really understand how the brain works and how to make us really want to be so plugged in to these apps. And so I feel like this is a small thing that we can do to just reclaim how we want to interact with these apps and not let them dictate to us how we interact with them, because it also has spillover effects into the rest of our lives. So anyway, going back to the whole thing that I said about my total social media break, for me, that helped me to just think about, when I reintroduce this into my life, how do I want to use it? And I feel like that's where this whole thing of me not spending more than a few minutes on my phone comes from, because I got to have the experience of just being like really quite offline for about a year, and then just being able to contrast that with previous experiences in the years where I was a lot more on social media, and then just finding an in-between somewhere on that spectrum of like how I can go through my daily life and still feel very present, but also be a bit on social media. So the next thing that I want to talk about is, how can we all have a better relationship with social media? So, obviously by now you can tell that I'm not a huge fan of social media. I am a little bit skeptical, if I'm going to be honest. I don't know if the Netflix documentaries are helping with that. But yeah, as I mentioned, it can be a lot of fun. And I'll be honest, when I open TikTok and I check out some of the videos that are there, honestly, I laugh a lot. And those laughs are good for me. You know what I mean? I personally enjoy it, but I'm also just conscious of how, if I overdo it, it'll make me feel in a way that I don't want to feel, right? Excuse me. So we thankfully are just in a time where there's been a lot of social discourse around social media and some of the effects that it can have on us. It's been in existence for long enough for scientists to do research and for them to, talk about the pros and cons on an evidence-based level, for some of this stuff to come out into the news, for people to come forward, you know what I mean, and share the experiences that they've had, positive and negative. And so we have a lot of information that we can use on top of just our own data points that we can collect from our own daily lives and our own relationship with social media, to put that together and then come up with boundaries that are supportive for our own wellness goals and desired quality of life, right? And my bias is that we all need social media boundaries. So I'll be upfront about that. That's my bias. So you determine what that looks like for you, And anyway, I'm going to share some tips that can be helpful for somebody who is in a place where they're like, what, I've let my social media kind of get out of hand and I want to just rein it in, you know what I mean? And also for the person who's like, actually, I think I'm pretty good, but, if I want to do an audit at some point, I can come back to this. So yeah, I'll share some tips that have helped me, and you go ahead and pick what you need and apply it to yourself. So the first one is to know yourself. Do you have a tendency to compare yourself to other people? Do you have specific struggles that may be worsened by social media? If yes, then you need to put in place boundaries to help you in those areas. So for example, even to this day, I don't follow accounts on social media that promote content that would trigger me to fall into an unhealthy relationship with my body and an unhealthy relationship with food. So I don't really follow people whose posts are just like really body focused. Like, I don't follow people who share a lot of like what I eat in a day, or maybe if I like them, but they have other content as well, I just won't watch their what I eat in a day videos. Because another thing is that I've just found that we as a culture are so preoccupied with our bodies and with food, and I fall into that. But a lot of people are still there. You never really know where the person, the influencer that you like, is in their own relationship with food and in their own relationship with their body. And so if you're not careful, you could have that you could find someone who maybe isn't in a good space, but is good at covering it up. And you have their unhealthy relationship kind of start to influence your own relationship with your body and with food. And so I'm just risk averse in that way. And I choose to protect myself and not really expose myself to that kind of stuff, because I know that I have a greater inclination towards comparing those aspects of my life. The second thing is to set time boundaries. So firstly, it's probably better not to open social media first thing in the morning, right? So I would advise for everyone, let's just save that for a bit later in the day, once you've had some time to ground yourself, right? So for example, I only usually, right, most of the time, I only check my WhatsApp after I've had time to pray, to read the Bible. So I feel grounded and I am now ready to let everything else in. The second tip under this whole time boundaries thing is to have focus times where you don't check your phone. So maybe this is when you're working or when you're spending quality time with someone. You know, like I really believe in efficiency. I don't like time wasting. So if I'm working, I don't want to be checking my phone because that's me wasting my own time. And why would I want to waste my own time? Or if I'm hanging out with someone, I want that time to really be connection. And so I'm not willing to let my cell phone get in the way of that. The next thing is define how long you can spend on social media at a time and also overall for the day. So I've already said this. For me, I don't want to spend more than a few minutes at a time on Instagram or TikTok or even sometimes WhatsApp. And I only really open my Instagram and TikTok probably twice a day, on a day when I am opening it, and some days I don't open it at all. And when I do open it, it's mainly for me to share about the podcast. So the third thing, turn off notifications. So for me, I pretty much have all my notifications off on my phone. So my email, my WhatsApp, my TikTok, social media, Instagram, it's all off. And that for me just honestly helps me have like the quiet that I need to function well. So I am an introvert, and I'm not super big on like defining myself by a lot of these, I guess, personality frameworks that are out there. But, you know, it is good to know yourself. And I know that I am an introvert. And there's this blog that I occasionally read, Introvert Dear. It just, sometimes I feel it's good to just like relate with people who are like me, because I feel like a lot of people are just different, you know, like so many people are extroverted and sometimes I feel like a square peg in a round hole. But anyway, so I read this blog occasionally, and one of the articles that I read spoke about how introverts require less external stimuli because they're actually more sensitive to it. Our brains, the reward center in our brain is more sensitive to it. So I don't need as much dopamine to feel good as an introvert that an extrovert needs, right? So for me, turning off my notifications on my phone helps me just to quiet things down for me, because otherwise I could start to feel a bit overstimulated. So I turn off my social media notifications. One, just, maintain my peace. But then also two, as I mentioned, the whole thing around time and attention. I don't want to be pulled out of my day, out of my in-person life when I don't want that. Like, I want it to be on my terms. I want to open Instagram when I want to. I don't want to be made to think about Instagram when that's not what I wanted to be doing, you know? So the only notifications that I have on are for things that are time sensitive. So this is a bit silly, but for like Uber Eats, you know, if I have a delivery coming, I obviously need to know about that. And so obviously for you, maybe if you have like a really intensive job that requires you to like, you know things as they're happening, then it makes sense for you to have your email notifications on. So just do what makes sense for you. But this is what I do. And yeah, as I was saying, for me personally, I just prefer to like check in on these things at set points in the day or like when I want to, because I don't really think that anything is really that urgent. I feel like we live in a culture that just makes it seem like everything is that urgent. But really, if someone needs to get hold of you, they WhatsApp you, they don't reach you, they will call you. If it's really extremely urgent, they'll call you back. Otherwise, you can go check your phone and see someone called you. Oh, I missed their call. I'll call them back. No train smash. That's my personal philosophy. And honestly, it just helps me to maintain my peace. Next, and the last point is to cultivate social media literacy. So take content with a pinch of salt, right? Social media literacy basically means to have the ability to critically evaluate the content that you consume on social media. So firstly, we just need to remember that it's a highlight reel. I think that we all on a high level know this, right? But it's so easy to forget it. It's like our brains just switch that knowledge off when we go on social media. So try to keep that with you, that when you're seeing someone on their vacation and you're like sitting at your desk on a boring or stressful day, remember that it's a highlight reel. They also have those days. They're just not showing it. And yeah, just don't compare your lows to someone else's highs, essentially. And then the next thing also on this note is to fact check information, especially, this is a wellness podcast. So especially things that pertain to health or something else of that level of seriousness. So don't just follow someone's advice or just copy their routine. Like I'm saying here, I'm sharing with you what has worked for me, but yeah, take it with a pinch of salt and take what works for you, right? So I find that we tend to subconsciously ascribe authority to people because they have what we want, right? For example, we are prone to follow someone's diet because they have the type of body that we want, right? However, just remember that there are a lot of half-truths, a lot of hype, a lot of pseudoscience, or just completely inaccurate information on social media. So just fact check stuff. Don't just follow someone's routine because they have, a nice body or like whatever. Just take it with a pinch of salt. And if it's anything that could have serious implications for your life, your health, or anything, just fact check it before you apply it to yourself. So those are my tips on how we can cultivate social media boundaries that protect our mental health in our daily lives, that help us compare ourselves less on social media, which I feel like really is one of the biggest challenges that a lot of us face with social, and just help us to have a better, more joyful experience with using social media that ultimately allows us to really just have like the peace and the joy that we all really just want in our lives. So I hope that this has been encouraging and a blessing for you. And as usual, please share this episode with someone. Or maybe if you don't feel like sharing this one, think about the episode that you loved the most and go to that one and share it with someone. And also leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcast or Spotify, which is where the majority of you guys listen. And then don't forget to go and subscribe to the newsletter. The link to that will be in the description. And I will see you in next week's episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I pray that it blesses you and equips you to create the change that you're looking for in your life. Stay in touch on social media. It's at Well with Jesus Podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and Pinterest. And share something from today's episode on your story. Maybe it's a quote, a screenshot, or whatever it may be. I'd just love to see what's resonating with you. It'll also help the show grow and reach more women like yourself. All the resources from today's episode will be in the podcast description below, so make sure to check that out. And until next week, dear friend, stay well with Jesus.